I recently discovered that one of the memories I use to explain my personality belongs to my sister. I took the news exactly as a stable adult should. I started cross-examining a photograph. It showed a small child at the zoo, beside a plastic penguin, wearing a red raincoat. I remembered being that child, the wet pavement, the crowd, grabbing a stranger's sleeve because from 6-year-old altitude, all adults were basically trousers. Then my sister said, "That's me." She turned the photograph over. Her name was on the back. This was inconvenient. My strongest evidence had changed sides. My mother confirmed it. My sister had been lost. I had spent the zoo trip refusing to leave the gift shop without a rubber snake. While she experienced genuine childhood terror, I was negotiating with management. Yet for years I had used her story to explain why I always check the route before going anywhere. I had built part of my personality on my sister's raincoat. Very strong foundation, no load-bearing facts. So if a defining memory can be wrong while I remain me, how many memories could disappear before I become somebody else? We like to imagine memory as a private video archive. Everything that happens is recorded. Then, years later, we press play. But memory is less like a security camera and more like a family group chat. The basic event may be in there, the details have been compressed. Several people have added comments. And one relative is extremely confident about something that did not happen. Ask your family who caused one argument on one holiday. You will not receive one event from 4 perspectives. You will receive 4 separate legal systems. In every version, the speaker was calm, the other person started it, and the devastating response was delivered immediately, not invented in the shower 3 days later. This matters because other people's memories can influence ours. If enough people repeat a detail, the detail can begin to feel familiar, and familiarity arrives wearing the same uniform as truth. That is probably how I acquired the zoo. My sister's story was told at dinners. I was present for the retellings. There was a red coat in the photograph. Eventually, my brain performed a hostile takeover. Even people with exceptionally detailed autobiographical memory are not immune to memory distortions. There are rare people who can recall ordinary dates from decades ago with astonishing accuracy. You can ask what happened on a random Tuesday in 1998, and they may actually know. I cannot reliably explain what happened last Tuesday. I know there was an email, possibly lunch. At some point, I moved a mug, but superior autobiographical memory does not turn the mind into a perfect recording device. People with that ability can still be influenced by misleading information. Imagine remembering thousands of Tuesdays and still losing an argument to the family group chat. That seems unfair. The reason memory is reconstructive may also be the reason it is useful. A perfect archive would preserve everything, every parking space, every password you later changed, every time somebody said "you too" after the waiter said "enjoy your meal," nothing would fade. At 3 in the morning, your brain would not have to search for an embarrassing memory. It could open the complete collection, Volume 1 of 47. Forgetting is not always a system failure. It can help us keep the general lesson while losing useless detail. You do not need to remember every hot pan you have touched. You need one durable policy regarding pans. You do not need a complete transcript of every awkward conversation. You need enough information to avoid saying "you too" at a funeral. The mind keeps the pattern and quietly removes several gigabytes of Tuesdays. This explains why most of life is missing. Entire months have been compressed into phrases like, "I was busy then." Most adults remember very little from their first years. But nobody looks at a 4-year-old and says, "Welcome, you appear to be the replacement." That earlier child still learned what felt safe, which voices meant home, how gravity worked, how to obtain a biscuit by asking one parent immediately after the other parent had said no, an advanced legal strategy. You may not remember becoming yourself. You mostly arrived later and claimed the results. And memory is not one single box. There are events you can replay, facts you know, skills your body performs, feelings that appear before their explanation. I do not consciously know the code to one door I use every week. If you ask me to say it, I have nothing. 4 digits have left the country. But put my hand near the keypad, and my fingers suddenly have security clearance. Apparently, part of my identity is stored in my index finger and refuses to speak to management. The same thing happens with songs. A song starts playing in a supermarket. Suddenly, I am emotionally back in 2011. I remember a room, a person, a version of myself who considered one particular jacket a major achievement. Meanwhile, in the present, I am standing beside the frozen vegetables holding broccoli. The body is in aisle 6. The personality has briefly left the building. Autobiographical memories often cluster around adolescence and early adulthood. Researchers call this the reminiscence bump. It helps explain an extraordinary scientific mystery. Why does every generation independently discover that music reached perfection when they were 17? Before that, musicians were experimenting. After that, the industry lost its way. But during the exact 3 years when you were taking buses, falling in love, and making disastrous hair decisions, art achieved its final form. What an incredible coincidence! Those years contain firsts. First, independence. First, serious friendships. First, choices that feel like yours. So they become crowded with memories we use to answer, "Who am I?" Your identity does not sample your life fairly. It has favorite seasons, and apparently a soundtrack. But memory does more than explain the past. It also helps build the future. When you imagine a possible event, the mind recombines pieces of things it already knows. The cafe comes from one memory. The person comes from another. The weather has been borrowed from a holiday where it rained for 6 consecutive days despite the brochure using the word Mediterranean. Even imagination shops in the archive. This means losing autobiographical memory does not only remove where you have been, it can make it harder to construct detailed versions of where you might go. The past is not merely behind you. Parts of it are being used to render next Thursday. So perhaps the frightening part of losing memory is not just losing old versions of yourself. It is losing some of the material from which you build the next one. Of course, the archive is not neutral. The current self is in charge of evidence selection. I say I am brave. My mind immediately presents the afternoon I removed a spider from the bathroom. It does not present the 14 occasions when a small noise caused me to inspect the hallway while holding a shoe. I say I have always been independent. My memory produces 3 supporting scenes and quietly seals the records from every time I called somebody to ask whether chicken was supposed to look like that. Past me is the witness. Present me is the lawyer. And somehow I am also the judge. This court has serious governance problems. We use memories to explain who we are, but who we are now influences which memories we retrieve and what we think they mean. The past writes the present. Then the present returns the document with tracked changes. That means you are not only the product of your memories, you are also one of their editors. Other people are editing too. A friend once thanked me for defending him during a terrible meeting. I did not remember the meeting. He remembered where everyone sat. He remembered what I said. He remembered that I was the only person who said it. From my side, the event was missing. From his side, it had shaped the next 5 years of our friendship. So did that version of me still count? I could not replay the choice, but he had been living with its consequence. We think identity is private property. Then an old friend tells a story and returns a room we did not know was missing. Other people are external backups. Backups that interrupt, dispute the file name, and occasionally remember you wearing a hat you deny owning. This leads to the most uncomfortable version of the question. Imagine 2 buttons. Button 1 removes every memory of the kind things you have done. You cannot remember helping anyone, but when somebody needs help, you still move toward them. Button 2 leaves every memory untouched. You remember every promise, every sacrifice, every person who trusted you. You simply no longer care. Which button changes you more? In experiments about personal identity, people often treat a change in moral character as more identity-destroying than memory loss. Memory matters, but character appears to matter differently. Someone can forget your birthday and feel terrible when they discover it. Someone else can remember the date perfectly and decide you are not worth calling. The first person has lost information. The second may feel more like a stranger. Maybe the deepest part of identity is not what you can retrieve. Maybe it is what you repeatedly choose when the situation arrives again. That does not make memory unimportant. Real memory loss can change continuity, independence, relationships, and self-knowledge profoundly. It is not a clever puzzle for the people living through it, but declaring that somebody is no longer there creates another kind of loss. It can erase a person before their life has ended. A biography may become harder to access while a preference remains. A familiar song can still matter. A hand can still be welcome. A joke can still land. And a person does not need to recite their history to deserve honesty, patience, choice, and respect. So would you still be you without your memories? Not completely, but not nobody. Memory is one of the main structures of identity. So are habits, values, relationships, the consequences of choices you no longer recall, and the choices you make now using whatever remains. Without my memories, I would lose private references, warnings, loyalties, and the route by which I became this version of myself. That loss would be real. But there is a difference between losing the story of a person and proving that no person remains. I kept the zoo photograph. It no longer explains why I check maps. The red raincoat has been removed from active duty as psychological evidence. But the photograph still matters. It reminds me that a vivid story can be wrong, that another person may hold the correction, and that I can lose an explanation for who I am without immediately losing who I am. I still check the route before I leave. I just no longer blame the penguin. So which would change you more? Losing every memory of the person you were, or keeping every memory and losing the values that made those memories yours? And if your friends remember a better version of you than you remember yourself, who has the stronger claim? You, them, or the photograph currently being questioned without legal representation?